Sometimes the accelerator pump circuit on a 4150 series carburetor confuses folks a little bit, so we're going to cover all the details, talk about all the pieces and parts, and how to tune it. Let's go. Now, when I say the accelerator pump circuit gets confusing for some folks, I think we all know what it does. It's there to provide a small shot of fuel into the stream so you can transition off idle to something with a little bit more load, a little bit more speed, a little more RPM. That part's not confusing. How to adjust, how to tune them, and how it all kind of works together, that's where we kind of get into some gray areas there. But as long as we take all those things into consideration, engine load, how the engine's configured, what it's designed to do, vehicle weight, purpose, rear end gear, transmission, all those things become important when you talk about how to adjust this correctly, because you want to get that shot right, give it the fuel that it needs, not too much and not too little, so you can get the vehicle moving and get it rolling down the road. So we're going to talk about all the details on that pump and literally how to adjust it out, because there's some circuits that are worked together with that I think people kind of forget about a little bit, and we're going to talk about those pretty heavily today. So remember, tuning a carburetor is a lot like building an engine. It's all got to work in combination together. If they don't, you run into those problems that, folks do when they're building an engine. They put too big of a camshaft on it, not enough cylinder head, intakes manifolds incorrect. All the little mistakes that people have made over and over and over again throughout the years, the same is made with the carburetor. So once you've got it kind of figured out, you get the size of the carburetor you need correctly, your ignition is set properly, and again, that's another one that I get a lot of argument on, or a lot of folks want to say, well, I don't have a number, but it's been set, it's good. You don't know the number, you don't know where you're at on initial or all in advance. It's not set correctly. Start around 12 degrees. That's usually where I start. I'm down here closer to sea level, but certainly the higher up you go in elevation, that may change. That may go to 13, 14, 15, 16 degrees. It's all relative to what the engine is asking for, where you're at, and what you're trying to get the carburetor and the engine to do together. So remember, it's like everything else. When we talk about carburetor sizing, too much of a shot of fuel is not a good thing. You get a lot of folks that say, well, it's got the 30cc pump on it from the factory. I'm going to put a bigger 50cc shot on and it'll be fine. If we're a street car, and most of the folks on this channel drive a street car. If you've got a race car, we can certainly talk about that down the road. But there's no reason to run a 50cc pump. It's very rare. Most manufacturers will tell you that it's rare that a street car needs a 50cc pump. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. If you tune it properly, you don't need that great big pump on there. Sometimes you do. Most of the time, you're going to not have to use that. So just like everything else, too much is not better. So let's talk about the process, and then we'll talk about getting in how to tune the accelerator pump. So the first thing you do, obviously, is make sure the ignition is set. Get yourself the proper amount of advance in there. And again, remember, you're going to come back to it. As you make these adjustments and tuning points on this carburetor, you're going to come back to the advance to make sure that it's correct. Give it a little bit more if you've given it a little bit more fuel. If you've taken some fuel away, you might be able to take away a little bit of timing out of it as well, too. It's all relative. It all goes together. You're going to make those adjustments side by side, same time. So don't forget the timing light. You're going to be needing it. Now, the cams is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood pieces to the puzzle here. We're going to talk about the positioning on it, how to select which one, and then how to know that you've got the right one. So let's just start with a basic overview. If you look at these, they've all got a different little profile, similar to a camshaft and an engine. Not all camshafts have the same lift. Not all camshafts have the same duration. And these are no different. They're exactly the same. They all have a little bit different profile, and all have a little bit amount of duration and shot and how quickly they deliver it. Black one is the typically what we call the most mild or smallest one, and the browns are typically the most aggressive. Now, Quickfield put together a nice little chart to tell us exactly what comes in their kit and what the shot is and how aggressive it is and how much degrees of rotation and where all those hit. So it's a nice little chart. You don't need to get that in technical with it, but it is certainly nice to have, and the graph kind of tells you, where things go. Like you had mentioned, the black is down here at the bottom, The brown is a more aggressive one. And if you look by the pump cam and the duration and the lift that comes out of there, it'll kind of tell you exactly, how much you're going to get for the degrees of rotation, your duration, and then this is the lift on it. So like I said, when we look at these brown cams and these black ones, it'll tell us pretty closely, which one's the bigger pump. And if you notice, some of these are a little bit different. So let's talk quickly about the position. Now there's two positions on the cam slot here. There's slot number 1, slot number 2 is technically what most people call those. And if you look at these, the brown one only has one slot that can go into. Now I've seen people drill and create another hole for themselves, and you can certainly do that if you'd like. I've also seen people shave these a little bit so they'll get a little bit more of a profile that they want, maybe get a duration, and you're certainly welcome to do all those things, but you'd better have some very sophisticated tuning and data logging devices with you to tell you if those changes that you're making are making any difference or not. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, you don't need to modify these cams. There's enough of them in here, enough different profiles that you can select the right one for your situation, and it'll clear up any hesitation that you're having. But we're going to talk about the position of where these go. The pink one is the only one that has 3, and then everything else has 2 positions in it. So let's talk about position of the cam and why would you move that. Now here's where things start to get a little bit confusing. To know which slot this goes in, you're going to have to go back to what your idle RPM is set at. Now on a street car, typically in park or in neutral on a manual transmission car, you're going to be around 800 RPM, maybe a little bit lower on a manual car. Sometimes you're right around 750, 800 on an automatic in park. That is where that first position on the cam comes into consideration. Anything around 800 RPM, now that varies kind of wildly. You see folks say if it's under 900 RPM, if it's between 5 and 700 RPM, then you can use that first position on it. Anything 1,000 RPM and up, or 800 and up, in this case 850 or so and up, you'd use the second position. Why is that? When you've got a little bit more idle speed and the throttle is cracked open just a little bit, what that is doing is already starting the process of moving the cam. And when you do that, you don't take full advantage of the sweep of that camshaft or cam lobe, and what you need is to readjust the cam so it will start later or open as it's needed. So if you're at a higher RPM, and I'll over exaggerate here, but if you're at a higher RPM and the throttle is open a little bit wider, you need to adjust the cam down so it does not start moving until you are ready to come off of your faster idle, and now you can take advantage of the full sweep of the cam and get the amount of fuel delivery and shot duration that you need out of that cam. But that's the reason why a lot of people will change these kind of willy-nilly without really understanding why, and thinking, well, if I change it to 2, then maybe it'll come in a little bit later, and that's how I get rid of a lean spot, depending on the RPM. No, it really all depends on the idle RPM and where you use that at. That's the easiest, best way to describe that, and it's really the best way to think about these in terms of where you need to be when you are trying to adjust what position that cam hole's in. Now, we can get really in-depth on this one. I've seen some tuning profiles and strategies where that will change a little bit, and it has nothing to do with idle RPM. It has more of when you want to deliver that shot, and that's why you can see folks change and add another drill point and change that cam if they want to come in a little bit later. I've seen them drill them right in the middle where it comes a little bit and open a little bit and it's already into the pump slot a little bit. There's a lot of different ways to tweak that, but if you follow that general rule of thumb, anything 800 and under, use slot number 1. Anything 850-ish and above, use slot number 2. That way you'll activate the full range of the cam. Let's talk another rule of thumb here. When you talk about which cam to use and which pump to use, here's a really good way of looking at it. The smaller cams, which is down here on this end of it, this goes small to largest cams, Smallest cams, you want to use the factory 30cc pump. When you get into the big cam, and when I mean big, I mean you're all the way up into the big heavy brown one that's got a lot of lift, a lot of duration to it, and a bigger, heavier shot. That one you use a 50cc pump. Now when you start declining down, I've used a 50cc on a blue and a green before. There's also another one in there. Orange is another color that we're missing out of here that I don't have in my little kit here, but that's another one in there, and really that's about as far as I will go. Everything else is going to use a 30cc pump. You know, the red and the pink are two very common ones. I use them quite a bit. The red one almost exclusively, and it's what's on most of these carburetors, an orange or a red cam. So you'll want to stick with that 30cc pump. Now I know it's the you know, almost said something I shouldn't there, but it's the measuring thing where I've got an 850 CFM carburetor on my street car. Well, yeah, it's too much. Same thing. Well, yeah, my carburetor's got a 50cc pump on it. It's probably too much if it's just street car, unless you've really done a lot of work, a lot of tuning, and you needed it. You probably don't need that on a street car. So that's kind of where to be at when you're talking about selecting the pump size. Let's talk about the pump really quickly before we get even further down the road on these. When you talk about an accelerator pump, and we talked about this pretty extensively in the Edelbrock video on the pump on their carburetors, this is a 30cc pump. If you look at, this is the 50cc body, this is the 50cc diaphragm out of that pump. When you rotate this and you get a full travel of the arm, you are not getting 30 cc's of fuel shot into the engine. You are getting a tenth of that, approximately. And what that means is the way these pumps are rated, same with the Edelbrock, same with the Holley, is how much fuel is delivered on 10 cycles of that pump. When you get to the 10th shot, approximately, you are going to deliver around 30 cc's of fuel. Now, that's usually off by a little bit. It's usually never, I've very rarely seen one that's exactly 30 cc's. It's 28.5, 29, 29.5, very close enough to call it a 30 cc. Same with a 50 cc. It's delivering a tenth of the size of that diaphragm. So don't think that if you put a 50 shot or a 50 cc pump on there, when you whack that throttle from idle to wide open throttle, that you're getting 50 cc's of fuel. You would literally drown that carburetor on a street engine and in quite a few applications on a race motor. So just keep that in mind. It's one little detail that we need to understand about these, that you're not getting a full 30 cc's or 50 cc's of fuel. It's all dependent on that cycle of 10 times. Now I've gone ahead and I've put the black cam on here in position number 1, and here's something that's another little detail. Every time you make a cam change or make a position change with the cam, you need to readjust the arm on the pump. Reason being is because it changes the tension, it changes the lash, so to speak, or how close or how tight that is, and you need to readjust that. Sometimes that means taking out a little bit of slack, sometimes it means adding some. I'm going to show you that here in just a second, because with the black cam is in there now, I'm going to get you a nice side shot, and then we're going to put the heavier brown one, and then I'm going to show you what it did to the adjustment here. This has got the black one on there. It is fairly tight. I could probably come off a little bit, and that's what I'm going to do. Let me get that adjusted correctly, take some of the tension off, or put some more tension to that to collapse that. That way we get the right tolerance. Right now there's a little too much tightness on there. Then we'll take a nice side shot view and we'll put it in the brown cam, and I'll show you the differences between them. There's tons of videos out there on how to take up the slack on the accelerator pump, but just remember that what you're trying to do is not get any preload on this arm and on the rod, and you're making sure that you're getting full travel, but not so much that it would go so far up and damage the diaphragm. That's why 15 thousandths is the feeler gauge that folks will use to make sure that they've got the right adjustment on there and that it's not going to cause any issue. Just make sure you set that properly, correctly, and then you can kind of keep moving forward. It's pretty easy to see when you stick that 15 thou in there what it is doing. It is pressing down on that diaphragm, and we don't want that. So let's tighten that up just a hair. All right, let's take a little tension and pressure off of that. Doesn't take much. Let's see how that did. Still just a hair, and by a hair I mean just a hair. That's perfect, I think. Yeah. About right. Like I said, you're just trying to take that 15 thou and making sure that you've got that adjustment in there. That way when you travel full, it's not pushing all the way down. So that's right where we need to be. I'm comfortable. Now what we'll do is we'll rotate that around. We'll put the brown pump in there. I'll get you a nice shot, and then we'll see the change on that. Now, if you remember correctly, with the black cam in there, we had the arm adjusted properly. We had the 15 thou that we wanted in there. Now we put the brown, biggest, most aggressive cam in there. And remember, we only have one slot on there. And it's going to put us in position number 2. Why? Because you'll want to run the bigger pump with that. We'll talk about positioning and RPM in just a quick second here, but look what it did to the arm. See how much adjustment it took out of there? Now we are not in contact at all with the accelerator pump because we have rotated the cam over. What that's designed to do is, like we said earlier, if you've got a little bit more RPM in it, what that does is now it starts to take that slack up because you have moved the cam to start opening and activating the accelerator pump with a little bit more RPM. So if you've got a race car, big, heavy, lumpy camshaft, needs 1,000, 1,100 RPM or whatever to be able to sit in the pits and idle, then that's the reason why you need to adjust the cam so it opens as it needs it. So if you're at a little bit higher RPM speed, it's adjusted a little bit better that way. When you're fully down and the screw is backed off all the way and you've got your RPM down where you would normally be on a street car, you are nowhere in shape or position to activate the pump. That's why every time you make a cam change, whether it's a little tiny small one or a great big one, you're always going to make an adjustment there. Every time you make a cam change or a position change, you've got to readjust the arm. One more last detail on cams before we move on. It's just like anything else. When you're trying to make some guesses on what needs to happen with it, and you think that, well, you've got the orange cam in there now, and you think you need a little bit more, fuel, and you want to make a cam change, it's all... If you're not tuning with something sophisticated like an AFR to help you understand what those changes are actually meaning, and you're trying to do the seat of the pants, it's going to take a little bit of time, and a lot of it's trial and error. What I wouldn't do is the same thing I wouldn't do on any carburetor, especially when you're trying to make jet size changes, power valve changes, is don't go from one extreme to another. Don't say, well, the orange pump isn't, or cam isn't really what I want. I want a little bit, change the delivery of that shot of fuel. Let me put go right to the brown pump, or it's too much, I need to lean it out, I'm going to go all the way down to the black. Make small changes, make small jumps. Don't make really big jumps in this thing. It doesn't do you any good. You're chasing yourself back and forth at that point, because if you go from the orange all the way up to the brown and you realize that that's too much, then what do? Do you go down to the blue, then down to the green, down to the red, till you try to sort it out? Make a small adjustment. If you're at the orange on the stock, just go up one to the red or go one down to the white, whatever it is. Don't make huge jumps in there. It's going to take you a lot longer to do it. Now, certainly with an AFR, those become a little bit easier. If you can have somebody watch the AFR while you are driving the vehicle at off idle, they can look at it when you snap that open. If it takes the hesitation out, how lean it goes or how rich it goes, certainly they can help you make that. Nozzles and the sizes. This one happens to be a 28. Both of these are 31, I believe. Yes and yes. Nozzles do not increase the amount of fuel that is delivered to the engine. The nozzle size changes the time that it's delivered. A 28 is going to be a longer shot of fuel. If this were a 35 or a 37, it's going to deliver it quicker, meaning the orifice size is much bigger. It will deliver the shot of fuel that the pump is dictating. The pump is the only thing that tells it how much it's going to deliver. Then all the nozzle is doing is how slow or how quickly it's going to deliver that. So let's talk about a little bit of those details. Most of these carburetors come with a 28 or a 31 in it, and most of the time that's good enough. You can make all the adjustments without changing all that. If you've got a little bit more racier application and you need to deliver that shot of fuel quicker, a nozzle change can certainly get you there. So a slower shot, the 28 or a 31, is typically really good for a street car, especially if it's a little heavier and it just needs a little bit more time to build power and to get up into the power band of the camshaft. It just all really depends on the application you're set. So just remember that about nozzles. I hear that all the time, that somebody goes, well, yeah, I had a 28 in there, and man, I put a 37 on there, and man, I got a bigger shot of fuel and it runs great. No, you just delivered whatever shot the pump was set for, and the cam, you just delivered it a little bit quicker. That's all you did. Now, when you switch from a 30cc pump over to the 50cc pump, at what stage or what nozzle should you be at to go to that bigger pump? Rule of thumb there is you'll want around a 37 or 40 on the nozzle size to go with the 50cc pump. Again, remember, you're delivering a little bit quicker, you're delivering a bigger shot of fuel. That's another reason why the 50cc pump is generally not very good on a street car, because you're delivering too much fuel too quickly. Now, the reason why we talked about all these in the order that we did is because that is the order that you'll make the adjustment in it. Don't start with a stock 4150 series carburetor where nothing has been changed from the factory and go right to making a nozzle change. It's the last thing you want to do. Again, you talk about all the other little things. Get the timing set. Make sure your fuel system's up to par. Then you can start making the adjustments. The very first thing is to get your arm adjusted correctly. Then you can start on the cam tuning. And most of the time, when you do that, you're pretty much done at that point. Nozzles don't really come into play that often. Making a change on that is not rare, but is certainly not an everyday, like changing jet sizes when you're doing tuning. Just really doesn't happen that often. So just keep that in mind. Take that first, make that arm adjustment, then do your cam, keep adjusting the arm at that point, and then once those two are set and you still feel like you need a little bit quicker shot of fuel, then you can make a nozzle change. But do that in those steps, and tuning the accelerator pump circuit will become a lot easier for you. If you jump around in there, I promise you're going to run into problems. Now, that's the other side of it, is you've got two different circuits. This one happens to be a 4160 style carburetor, so it only has one accelerator pump. And tuning the secondary pump, just a little bit different, but really it's about the same. As you are rotating through the throttle and you activate the secondary side of it, it's the same thing. Just like on the primary side, it's got a cam, it's got an adjustment. You need to make those at the same time. Typically, when we're talking about an accelerator pump, in this case, we're talking a lot of off idle, and the accelerator pump on the secondary side doesn't come into play. But certainly on a double pump style carburetor like this edelbrock, you'll want to make that adjustment on both accelerator pumps at the same time. Then you can begin to tune the primary side and start working through the process. But again, it's the same thing. When you get into more of the secondaries opening, more of it, and you realize that you've got another little spot that you need to help correct, and as that shot of fuel goes through there, you want to add or take away. Again, this is where it's really, really fun to do carburetor tuning when you've got an AFR gauge, because it allows you to see that if it starts to roll into that, wide open throttle, and you've got a shot where you can see a little bit more fuel being dropped, and your AFR stays around that 12.5 that you're looking for, but it kind of rolls up to 13.5 or something, and then it drops back off when the main metering circuit on the secondary side kicks in and you start drawing enough fuel. Maybe it's an accelerator pump issue, and maybe you can make a cam change to change it on the secondary side. Now, I know these videos are long when it comes to these, and I do apologize for that, but I wanted to include everything in one video because I didn't want to break it down and just talk about cams and just talk about nozzles. We've talked a little bit about the nozzle size in another video, and we've talked about accelerator pump size and how that's rated. So I didn't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on all those. The cams I wanted to really concentrate on today, give you a better understanding of it, and give you an understanding of the entire system and how it kind of operates together. The accelerator pump is a nice transition circuit within the carburetor to help you avoid any lean spots when you're going in from an off-idle situation rolling into more power. So it's a great little tool to have to help you start to deliver that fuel and make sure that you're not getting into any of those lean or dead spots. So absolutely love the accelerator pump circuit, but it is certainly very misunderstood and very mistuned at times, because a lot of times what happens is, folks will go, I got a little bit of a dead spot. They won't even think of the cam. They'll immediately go right to the nozzle. And maybe the nozzle isn't the best place to start. Go through that process step by step as I laid it out, and I promise you'll get a better result in the end. Now, for those of you that have stuck around this long, I do appreciate it. The edelbrock 650 is going to the Slant Daily Garage. Remember, we added his sticker over there to it. That 650 is going on to his Slant 6 engine in his Dart. Very cool project. He's a local guy. His name is Shane. If you're not following his channel, please do. He will have tuning videos on that, certainly much quicker than I am. The next project for the GMC truck is going to be some edelbrock carburetor tuning, and then we will eventually get to that on the GMC truck. But if you want to see that in action right away, follow Shane over at Slant Daily Garage, and I promise you, you'll have a lot of fun with that channel. He's done some really cool things to that Slant 6, and he's got a bunch of other projects that he's working on. So if you've got any questions on accelerator pump tuning, please don't hesitate. Ask them down below. I love answering all your questions. If I can get you any help or figure out a tuning problem that you're having, always love to do that. Please don't hesitate to visit my website. I've got a lot of resources on there that are free to download. You can certainly join us on our Facebook group or our Instagram and check us out over there as well. And yeah, so hopefully between one of those, you'll find a spot to ask a question and get a good answer and help you through your tuning process. So we'll catch you guys on the next one. We'll see you.